The termination email dropped into my inbox at 8:02 a.m., exactly 3 minutes after I poured my morning coffee. The subject line read contract revocation, effective immediately. I sat at my kitchen island, watching the steam rise from my mug. 10 years, for a decade. I had managed the entire logistics and supply chain database for Sterling Logistics. I started when we were tracking shipments on whiteboards, and I personally built the automated workflow that currently kept 3 regional warehouses running without a single bottleneck. The new CEO, Marcus, had taken over exactly 3 weeks ago. He was 32, wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than a forklift, and viewed veteran employees as expensive liabilities. He didn't care about how things worked. He only cared about the bottom line on his quarterly spreadsheet. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to draft a furious, emotional response. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. I had seen this coming since our first staff meeting, where he interrupted every senior manager and openly mocked the outdated operational expenses. My phone buzzed. It was a calendar invite from HR. Exit meeting. 9 a.m. Bring all the system access codes. I opened my laptop and pulled up the master dashboard one last time. Green indicators blinked across the screen, tracking hundreds of delivery trucks in real time. It was flawless. It was also entirely reliant on an external data processing architecture that I had developed on my own time, hosted on my own private servers, and licensed to Sterling Logistics under a very specific, carefully worded vendor agreement. I closed the laptop and put on my coat. If Marcus wanted an immediate transition, he was going to get exactly that. What he didn't realize was just how abrupt that transition would be. Hello, dear viewers of Her Fear. We received the notice that YouTube had disabled monetization for our channel. Since then, we have no longer had any income from YouTube, while producing each video still requires a great deal of work and expenses, such as script writing, editing, publishing content, and maintaining our team. However, to continue keeping this channel alive, we truly need your support. You can support us through the Ko-fi link placed in the video description, pinned comment, and community tab. Any support, no matter how small, means so much to us. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has continued to stay with and support Her Fear. The conference room felt overly sterile, smelling faintly of glass cleaner and expensive cologne. Marcus sat at the head of the long oak table, flipping through a stack of printed reports. An HR representative, Linda, sat next to him, refusing to make eye contact with me. I took the seat across from them, placing my laptop neatly on the table. I kept my posture relaxed, hands folded quietly in my lap. Maya, Marcus began, his tone clipped and impatient. He didn't even bother with a greeting. We are restructuring the department. Your role is no longer required. We're moving to an internal IT management structure to cut redundant vendor costs. I understand, I replied softly. He finally stopped flipping through the papers, though his eyes remained fixed on his iPad. We need all administrative rights, passwords, and source code by noon today. Hand over my system. I smiled calmly. It was never yours. Marcus paused. His head snapped up, his brow furrowing as if I had just spoken a foreign language. Excuse me, we paid your salary. We own the infrastructure. You paid my salary for operational management, and you paid a monthly licensing fee for access to the data processing engine. I clarified, my voice steady. The user interface on your monitors is company property. The core logic engine, the API bridges, and the hosting environment belong exclusively to my LLC. It's clearly outlined in Section 4 of the vendor addendum you signed last week without reading. Linda's face drained of color. She frantically started tapping on her tablet, pulling up my file. This is ridiculous, Marcus scoffed, leaning back in his chair. I'm not playing legal games with you. Maya, leave the documentation on the desk and clear out your office. As you wish. I stood up, nodded politely to Linda, and walked toward the door. Marcus had no idea what he had just initiated. My office was small, filled mostly with technical manuals and a few potted plants. David, the senior warehouse manager, leaned against my door frame as I placed my coffee mug into a cardboard box. "Tell me the rumors aren't true," David muttered, crossing his arms. He looked exhausted, carrying the weight of a 5 a.m. shift. "I'm afraid they are." I grabbed a stack of notebooks. "Effective immediately." David ran a hand over his face. "Marcus is insane. You're the only one who knows how the routing algorithms actually work. What are we supposed to do when the holiday freight arrives next week?" "He has a plan, apparently." I taped the box shut. "Don't worry about me, David. Should just keep an eye on the dispatch screens." I didn't linger. I handed my physical keycard to the front desk, walked out into the crisp morning air, and drove straight home. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't plant a virus, nor did I physically cut any wires. I didn't need to. Sitting at my home workstation, I opened my cloud provider's developer console. Sterling Logistics was listed as an active authorized IP address for my proprietary API suite. According to my contract, termination of my employment automatically nullified the commercial license. I didn't delete their data. I simply revoked the authentication tokens. I clicked revoke access. There was no dramatic error message on my end. The status icon just quietly shifted from green to gray. The connection was severed. I closed the browser, walked into the kitchen, and started preparing lunch. The machine was officially disconnected. For the first few hours, nothing at Sterling Logistics appeared broken. I knew exactly how the system behaved. The dashboards in their logistics center were designed to cache data to prevent screen flickering during minor internet dips. For the rest of the morning, Marcus's newly appointed internal IT team likely clicked through the interface, marveling at how easy it was. They saw trucks moving on the map, inventory numbers holding steady, and automated delivery schedules looking pristine. They thought they had won. They thought they possessed a self-sustaining ecosystem. I spent the afternoon at a local coffee shop, enjoying a slice of lemon pound cake and drafting a business plan I had been putting off for 2 years. My phone remained silent. I felt lighter, the chronic tension in my shoulders finally dissolving. At 2 p.m., my private server logs showed a massive spike in ping requests. The cache at Sterling Logistics had expired. The front-end interface was desperately trying to call the back-end logic engine to fetch new data, but the door was locked. The front end was asking for routing assignments, but there was no brain left to answer. I took another bite of my cake. The illusion of control in that office was evaporating. They were about to discover the difference between a steering wheel and an engine. The trucks on their screens weren't moving anymore. They were frozen in time. At 2:45 p.m., the quiet of my living room was interrupted by a rapid succession of vibrations. My phone screen lit up with 3 back-to-back texts from David, the senior warehouse manager. "David, Maya, did you run an update before you left? The dispatch board is completely blank." "David, wait, I just heard you were let go. Please tell me you can still log in remotely." "David, the floor is completely gridlocked. We have 60 trucks waiting and no manifests." I stared at the messages, taking a slow, steady breath. The operational blackout had finally hit. Sterling Logistics hadn't experienced a network crash, and their internet connection was perfectly fine. What they were experiencing was a total data drought. Without the real-time processing from my API, their shiny, expensive warehouse management screens had absolutely nothing to display. "Maya, I'm no longer authorized to access the system." "David, Marcus took all the documentation this morning. You'll have to route this to internal IT." I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb for all numbers associated with Sterling and walked into the kitchen to make a cup of chamomile tea. Back at the logistics center, I knew exactly what that gridlock looked like. A modern supply chain doesn't just slow down when it loses data, it hits a concrete wall. The loading docks relied on automated barcode scanners to sort outgoing packages. Without my back-end logic engine verifying the destination codes and returning the routing instructions, the scanners would just emit a flat, unresponsive error beep. Packages would pile up at the end of the conveyor belts. 4 Clift operators, who usually relied on mounted tablets to tell them exactly which pallet to pull from which rack, were now just driving in circles or sitting parked in the aisles. Out in the yard, dozens of long-haul drivers were likely blocking the entrance gates, waiting for digital clearance that was never going to generate. The darkness was spreading through their infrastructure like a slow-acting paralysis. The inventory trackers couldn't update the client portals, meaning Sterling's biggest customers were currently looking at blank delivery estimates. Marcus had wanted to bring the infrastructure entirely in-house to trim a single line item off his budget. He was currently saving that vendor fee, but every minute the freight that sat idle on the warehouse floor. The company was hemorrhaging thousands of dollars in delay penalties and missing guaranteed delivery windows. The illusion of control in that corporate office was evaporating rapidly. They were about to discover the very expensive difference between holding a steering wheel and actually owning the engine. By 4 p.m., the ripple effects of the warehouse paralysis finally reached the corporate IT department, and my personal email inbox started filling up. The first message was polite, sent by Kevin, the lead network technician. Maya, hope you're having a good afternoon. We seem to be experiencing a database sync issue on the main floor. Could you point us to the server directory for the routing logic Marcus mentioned? You left the documentation. I didn't reply. I poured my tea into a travel mug, grabbed my coat, and decided to take a walk around the neighborhood park. The autumn air was crisp, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't carrying a company pager or worrying about server uptime. 45 minutes later, a second email arrived from Kevin, completely dropping the pleasantries. Maya, urgent. The documentation you left only covers the UI framework and front-end visual layouts. Where's the core database hosted? I've searched every local server and AWS instance the company owns. We are completely blind on the floor and shipments are backing up into the street. Please call me ASAP. I forwarded the emails to a dedicated legal folder I'd created that morning and kept walking. I could easily picture the chaos unfolding in Marcus's sleek glass office. He and his newly appointed IT team were hitting a massive, impenetrable wall. They had spent hours digging frantically through the company's internal servers, searching for lines of code that simply didn't exist on their hardware. They were hunting for a ghost. My system was a SaaS model, software as a service. Sterling Logistics had essentially stopped paying their water bill, and Marcus was currently demanding his IT team tear up their own plumbing to figure out why the taps were dry. I imagined Kevin standing in front of Marcus's polished oak desk, sweating, trying to explain to a furious CEO that the company didn't actually possess the software that ran their entire business. I found an empty bench near the duck pond and sat down, watching the evening commuters drive by. 10 years of flawless execution. Dismissed in a 3-minute meeting because a 32-year-old executive thought industrial logistics was something you could understand from reading a spreadsheet summary. He looked at my salary and assumed I was just a highly paid administrator who clicked buttons on a screen. Now, his entire operation was flying blind. 3 regional warehouses, 80 trucks, and thousands of parcels were all stranded in limbo, perfectly illustrating a lesson Marcus was about to learn the hard way. You can't fire the architect and expect to keep the blueprints for free. The silence from upper management broke the next morning. At 8:30 a.m., an email arrived directly from Marcus. The subject line was entirely in caps. Urgent system restoration required. Maya, your deliberate sabotage of company infrastructure is a severe violation of company policy. Restore the database connections immediately, or we will pursue damages for lost revenue. The network has been dark for 18 hours. Marcus? I didn't rush to reply. I calmly brewed my morning coffee, opened a blank document, and drafted a very specific response. I attached the signed vendor agreement, highlighting Section 4 in bright yellow. Marcus, as discussed in our exit meeting, Sterling Logistics held a standard commercial license for my proprietary data processing engine. Upon termination of my employment, that license was automatically revoked per the contract terms. There is no sabotage. I simply removed your access to my personal property, just as you requested when you demanded an immediate transition. If Sterling Logistics wishes to establish a new, independent vendor contract for external data processing, my emergency consultation rate is $450 per hour with a minimum retainer of 40 hours paid up front. Regards, Maya. I hit send. I knew exactly what was happening in his office. He was furious, realizing his threat had completely backfired. He couldn't force me to turn on my own servers. The ball was entirely in his court. and every passing minute was costing him a small fortune. At 10:15 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's direct office line. I let it ring twice before answering. Maya speaking. This is extortion, Marcus spat, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I could hear other people shifting in the background, likely the IT director and legal counsel. He had put me on speakerphone. Good morning, Marcus, I replied evenly. It's not extortion. It's a standard vendor negotiation. You terminated my previous contract. I provided my new rates. You purposely hid the fact that the company didn't own the back end. I literally handed you the contract and explained it to you during my termination meeting. I reminded him. You told me to stop playing legal games and to clear out my desk. Silence stretched across the line. A new voice spoke up, Sarah, the company's head legal counsel. Maya, this is Sarah. The operational standstill is causing critical damage. Is there any way we can negotiate a temporary bridge while we migrate to a new system? My terms were clearly stated in the email. Sarah, the retainer must be wired, and a temporary 30-day commercial license agreement must be signed. Once the funds clear, the API tokens will be reissued. You're demanding $18,000 just to flip a switch. Marcus interrupted, his ego refusing to yield. I'm charging $18,000 for my intellectual property, my time, and the emergency resolution of a crisis you created. I answered softly, take it or leave it. Have a good day. I hung up. I didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, my bank application sent a push notification. A wire transfer for the full retainer amount had cleared my account. A minute later, a signed copy of my new temporary licensing agreement appeared in my inbox, bearing Marcus's tight, reluctant electronic signature. He had been forced to authorize it. The board of directors had likely caught wind of the catastrophic halt in logistics, leaving him with absolutely no leverage. I sat at my workstation and opened my developer console. I generated a new set of API keys, restricted explicitly to a 30-day window. I pasted them into an encrypted email and sent them to the lead IT technician with a brief set of deployment instructions within 15 minutes. The data blackout ended. Information flooded back into their systems. Trucks were dispatched. Warehouse scanners beeped back to life, and the massive backlog of freight slowly began to move. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I had fixed their problem, but the dynamic had permanently shifted. I was no longer their employee, subject to Marcus's condescension and abrupt demands. I was an independent contractor holding the absolute upper hand, fully compensated for my value. Marcus had wanted total control. Instead, he had just paid a massive premium to rent the exact same system he had thrown away the day before. I never returned to the Sterling Logistics office. I didn't need to. Over the next 30 days, their internal IT team scrambled to build a replacement for my architecture. It was a messy, expensive process. And from what David told me over coffee a few weeks later, it ran at half the efficiency of my old setup. Marcus didn't last long. The board of directors launched an internal review regarding the sudden, massive expenditure and the sheer operational negligence of his first month. By the end of the quarter, he was quietly asked to resign. He packed his expensive suits and left, his arrogance finally catching up to him. As for me, the transition was the best thing that could have happened. Word travels fast in the supply chain industry. When competitors heard that the architect behind Sterling's previously flawless logistics network was now an independent consultant, my phone started ringing. I officially registered my LLC, moved into a bright, airy co-working space, and took on 3 new corporate clients within the first 6 months. I set my own hours, drafted my own ironclad contracts, and never allowed a single client to assume ownership of my intellectual property. I occasionally think back to that morning in the sterile conference room. Marcus demanding I hand over my life's work without looking up from his tablet. He taught me a valuable lesson that day: never apologize for knowing your worth, and never leave your keys in a house you don't own. If there is one profound takeaway from those chaotic 30 days, it isn't about the satisfaction of outsmarting an arrogant boss. It is a quiet realization about the nature of personal leverage and professional boundaries. For a decade, I believed that my quiet dedication and flawless execution were enough to secure my place. But I learned that people will often confuse seamless competence with disposability because I made the complex look effortless. They assumed it held no value. The real triumph wasn't the wire transfer or the scrambled apologies. It was the moment I stopped waiting for validation from a system that didn't understand me. I realized that true security doesn't come from a company's loyalty to you, but from your unwavering ownership of your own skills. You don't ever have to raise your voice, argue your worth, or beg for a seat at the table. You simply need to build your foundation so solidly that when they carelessly try to remove you, they immediately realize they were standing on your floor. Hello, dear viewers of Her Fear. We received the notice that YouTube had disabled monetization for our channel. Since then, we have no longer had any income from YouTube. While producing each video still requires a great deal of work and expenses, such as script writing, editing, publishing content, and maintaining our team. However, to continue keeping this channel alive, we truly need your support. You can support us through the Ko-fi link placed in the video description, pinned comment, and community tab. Any support, no matter how small, means so much to us. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has continued to stay with and support Her Fear.